and welcome to A Little Bit Forward, the show where we do not pretend to have any of the answers and instead focus on asking you interesting questions. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the notion of discrete or binary versus continuous decisions. And often in organizations, we are asked to make discrete or binary decisions. We're often asked to choose between yes or no, A, B, or C. Where in reality, the world is far more complex than that. It's far more nuanced than that. There is often a continuous or infinite number of choices that we could actually be deciding between, and somehow we've distilled this down to a yes or no situation. So we talk about this kind of scale of complexity. We do start with the binary, the yes or no. We can have discrete options, where it's A, B, or C. And then we kind of move into areas where there is a bounded continuous choice. You can choose any number between 0 and 10. And then we can have an unbounded continuous choice where we have a situation where you can choose any amount of money as long as it's in dollars and cents. As you can see in each one of these situations, the level of information or the complexity around what we're dealing with goes up. And so this often creates a challenge, in a world where we are time poor, where we're resource constrained. We don't always have the capacity to deal with all the additional complexity that comes with continuous choice. And so often we find ourselves dumbing things down, simplifying things. And I think we do this in both situations when we're talking about options and choices, but we also do it with people. A couple of years ago, I wrote a blog post. I think it was called You a Yes, a No, or a Definite Maybe. And it talks about the discomfort that we often feel when other people try and dictate binary choices on us. And there's a situation where this is really pronounced when we start to look at things like American politics, where people are expected to make a binary choice between being a Democrat or a Republican. And we even see this when we look at US political maps, and we talk about the idea that states are either red states or blue states. And the truth of it is none of those states are red or blue. Even if we to assume that all the voters in that state voted for either a Democrat or a Republican, which is not true. They do have independent candidates as well. But even if we were to assume that that was the case and we were to take the amount of red and take the amount of blue, what we're going to find is different shades of purple. In fact, every state in the US is a different shade of purple. This is still a gross simplification of what people really believe. But in itself, when we start talking about shades of purple, this feels like so much more information and so much more to digest than whether someone was Republican or Democrat, or whether the majority of the people in that state were so. There's actually been some interesting work then done at a more granular level where we start to think about individual Democrats and Republican voters, people who self-identify as a supporter of one of those two political parties. And this was some work done a couple of years ago around the 2020 US election by a company called Beyond Conflict International. And they started to ask Democrat voters what they think of Republicans around controversial topics like immigration and gun control. And on a scale of 1 to 100, how strong they felt other Republicans were around this. And then they asked Republicans the same question: how strongly do you feel about this? And so there was this kind of overlap of information between our perception of others and how they really were. And it turns out the perceptions were far stronger in their binary nature than they were when we actually found there was really huge amounts of common ground in reality. And this is a cause of massive challenge in the US. The amount of conflict that this has now created is quite extraordinary. Our desire to oversimplify has created this binary situation, and we're ignoring opportunities for collaboration and common ground to be found. And I suppose this is my question for you in your own work, in your own life. Where are you potentially treating things as being binary or discrete when they're actually continuous? And in doing so, are you potentially creating conflict or losing opportunities for common ground because you fail to see the nuance in the situation? So in a second, we're going to have 5 minutes of silence, and you'll have an opportunity just to ruminate on this if you would like. course, if you don't want to, I was going to force you to, you can skip through the end of the track, but there's 5 minutes of kind of time built in to have a little bit of a chance to reflect on this question. Where is it in your life that you're potentially treating things as being binary or discrete, either other things or potentially even other people? And in doing so, missing the opportunity for common ground and for nuance. Over to you.